I always believed music was my sanctuary. The violin under my chin, the bow gliding across strings, it was where the world made sense. Where I made sense. Tonight, though, there was no sanctuary. Only Victor. He sat in the shadowed corner of the room, tall, silent, like a statue carved of ice and judgment. My fingers shook ever so slightly as I raised the bow. The candlelight flickered across his face, highlighting the sharp angles I had once admired, before I realized admiration could be dangerous. I told myself to focus, to breathe, to play. Play, he said, voice low but firm. His eyes pierced mine, waiting. I took a deep breath and began. The first notes were careful, deliberate, smooth, perfect. I let the music flow, hoping he wouldn't notice the tremor in my hand. But the moment I reached the crescendo, it happened, a single wrong note, tiny and fleeting, almost imperceptible. I froze. My chest tightened. He had always hated imperfection, always demanded obedience. My heart thudded in my throat. Silence stretched between us like a physical weight. He stood. Slowly. The sound of the chair scraping the floor made me flinch. His shadow moved across the room, looming, swallowing the candlelight. Stop, he said calmly. No anger. No warning. Just those two syllables, sharp and final. My violin trembled in my hands, as if sensing what was coming. I'm sorry, I whispered, barely above a breath. It was just a mistake. His hand shot out, gripping my chin. My eyes met his. For a moment, I thought he might relent. But that was a fantasy. He tilted my head back slightly, his thumb brushing my cheek, a strange, menacing tenderness, and then the blow landed. My face burned, my lips tasted copper, and the world tilted. The violin slipped from my hands, clattering against the floor. My knees almost gave way. You embarrass me, he said quietly, voice even, terrifyingly calm. Do you know how that sounds to me? I didn't mean, my voice caught. Tears pricked, but I blinked them back. He hated tears more than mistakes. The next moment I saw it, my violin broken. Wood splintered like fragile bones. A shriek of agony echoed in my chest, louder than the cracking wood. My instrument, my friend, my voice in the world, was ruined. And somehow so was I. Clean it up, he ordered, already turning away, as if nothing had happened. And don't play again until you remember who you belong to. His words were a whip, cutting through every ounce of self I had left. I knelt among the shards of my life, trembling. My hands shook as I picked up fragments of wood, careful not to touch too much, careful not to disturb him. Inside me, a tiny flame of rebellion flickered, but it was fragile, almost extinguished by fear. That night, in the suffocating quiet of my room, I stared at the ceiling, feeling the ache in my face, my hands empty, my soul hollow. I told myself it was a mistake, that he didn't mean it, that love could forgive cruelty. But deep down, something cold began to grow in the pit of my stomach, a thought I dared not voice. Not yet. Not aloud. Music had once saved me. Tonight it had betrayed me. And so had I, for letting him break me with a single note. And somewhere in that shivering darkness, I realized I would never be the same again. The week after that night passed in a blur of shadows and whispers. I moved through our house like a ghost, careful not to disturb him, or more precisely, careful not to be noticed. I had learned the subtle art of silence, the way to breathe without drawing attention, the way to move without making a sound. Every creak of the floorboard, every soft echo of my footsteps felt like a warning. I was always on edge, always waiting. Victor acted as if nothing had happened. He spoke politely, even gently at times, as if kindness could erase the memory of that first strike. "How are you feeling today, Aria?" he'd ask, voice smooth too smooth. And I would nod, smile faintly, whisper, "I'm fine." Inside, I felt hollow, every note of me muted. I avoided mirrors. I avoided the sound of my own voice. Most of all, I avoided myself. My reflection reminded me of vulnerability, of a body that had been violated, of a soul that had trembled. Each glance at my hands, once elegant and confident on the violin, now made me flinch. One night, in the desperate search for some semblance of comfort, I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the photo gallery. I hesitated. But then I found it, a picture from years ago. Me, laughing with my brother in the sunlight. Behind us, Jaxson Stone, his arms crossed, smiling like he belonged somewhere else but chose to stay anyway. A stab of longing cut through the numbness. Jaxson, always patient, always kind, always the one who had loved me silently, from a distance. I pressed the photo to my chest and whispered his name. And immediately guilt followed. I wasn't supposed to think of him. I wasn't supposed to imagine a life where someone cared for me. Victor came home late that night. I was lying on the floor, curled in a blanket, pretending to sleep. But I didn't close my eyes entirely. I wanted to be invisible. "You're tense," he said, standing in the doorway. His voice was like ice wrapped in velvet. "What are you hiding from me?" "Nothing," I murmured, and my voice shook. I hated the tremor, but I couldn't stop it. A week after the first strike, the second came. It wasn't premeditated, not entirely, but it hit harder. The blow wasn't just physical. It shattered something inside me that I didn't even know existed. The floor rushed up. Darkness swallowed me, and fear became my cocoon. In that darkness, I felt my last threads of hope snap.
I didn't resist.
I couldn't. When I finally regained consciousness, the room was unfamiliar. My body ached in ways that were more than skin deep. Every movement reminded me of the violence. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears. And yet, something within me had begun to harden. Not surrender, not despair, something colder. Because even as I lay there, broken and terrified, I realized that the girl who had loved Victor so blindly, the girl who had believed in beauty and music and light, was gone. She couldn't survive in a world like his. And somewhere, in the quiet pulse of my pain, a new thought began to take shape, one that whispered of escape, one that whispered of survival. I don't know how long I was gone. When the darkness took me, it didn't feel like sleep. It wasn't a temporary reprieve. It was an absence, a void, a place where pain, fear, and Victor ceased to exist. My body was heavy, distant, like it belonged to someone else. My mind floated in a silence so absolute it was almost soothing. In that dark, I met a version of myself I didn't recognize. She was small and fragile, yes, but also ruthless in her own way. She wasn't afraid of Victor anymore. She didn't even remember him. All that remained was a stark clarity. Fear had no hold here. Pain had no authority. She was free in a way I hadn't thought possible. I wanted to stay in that nothingness forever. To let the world forget me. To disappear. And for a moment, I almost did. The world wouldn't notice me gone. Nobody would search. The girl who had been Aria Thorne, the delicate, obedient, trembling musician, was already dead. But then, something else stirred, something colder and harder than fear. A voice I didn't recognize at first, but gradually understood as my own whispered, "You survived. Now rise." The transition back to consciousness was not gentle. My eyelids fluttered like trapped butterflies, each blink a reminder that the world outside was cruel, loud, and relentless. My body was a cage, and every limb screamed in protest as I tried to move. The room was unfamiliar. Shadows loomed where the corners of the ceiling should have been, and faint sunlight crept through curtains that I didn't remember drawing. A soft voice spoke nearby. "Aria? Can you hear me?" I tried to answer, but my lips refused. My throat felt like sandpaper. My eyes darted around, desperate for something familiar, something safe. And then I heard it again, soft, deliberate, caring. "It's okay. You're awake. You're safe." Somewhere, deep inside me, a spark of recognition lit. Safety. Protection. Not from Victor. Not from fear. But from someone who wasn't him. Someone who would never raise a hand against me. Even in that fragile, broken moment, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't be the same Aria Thorne who had trembled at the shadow of a cruel aristocrat. That girl had died in the darkness. Yes, but I had been reborn there. Hardened, resolute, unyielding.
I didn't cry.
I didn't flinch. I simply breathed, shallow at first, then deeper. Each inhale was a statement. Each exhale a declaration. I had survived. I had survived the violence, the fear, the terror, and somehow, impossibly, I had survived myself. And as the room slowly sharpened into focus, as the light touched my face, and I realized I had opened my eyes for real, I understood one truth, with absolute certainty. I was no longer afraid, and I would never be afraid again. Leaving him wasn't dramatic. There were no flares of rebellion, no fiery speeches. There was only determination, cold, ironclad determination that had grown in the darkness where I had died and been reborn. I waited until he left for the evening. His absence was like a dark promise. I had hours, maybe minutes, before he returned. I wrapped myself in the thickest coat I could find, the one that had always smelled faintly of my own perfume. It was comforting in a way I hadn't expected, an armor of familiarity against the storm outside. Each step was agony. My body remembered the violence even when my mind tried to forget. My bruises throbbed beneath my clothes, reminders that leaving wasn't going to be simple. My knees shook. My fingers curled into fists. And yet I moved forward because forward was the only direction that mattered. I knew where I was going. Jaxson Stone's house. My brother's best friend. The man who had loved me quietly for years, silently, without ever expecting anything in return. He had always been a presence at the edges of my life, steadfast, dependable, and unshakably gentle. He didn't know I needed him yet, but instinct told me he would. The streets were merciless.
Cold wind bit at my cheeks.
The night was quiet, but in that quiet, every footstep sounded like an alarm. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, to reach inside me. I shivered, not just from the cold, but from the memory of his hands, from the memory of what I had endured. Halfway there, I stumbled. Pain shot through my side, a cruel reminder that my body had limits. I fell to my hands and knees, crawling the last stretch of the journey. Each inch was a victory. Each scrape against the rough pavement was a statement. I would survive. I would not go back. By the time I reached his door, my strength was nearly gone. My hands were scraped and raw, my hair damp with sweat, my lungs burning. I raised my hand to knock, and it shook so violently that I almost gave up. Almost. And then I did the only thing I could. I collapsed. My body surrendered before my spirit ever would. Moments later, a door opened. Light spilled into the darkness, and there he was. Jaxson. Taller than I remembered, stronger, more solid. But what struck me most wasn't his size. It was the look in his eyes.
Shock. Fear.
And, beneath it all, an unmistakable surge of protective fury. Aria. His voice broke through the fog that had surrounded me. What the hell happened? What did he do to you? I tried to speak, but no words would come. My throat was tight. My mind raced. I only managed to whisper, barely audible. I left. The fear in his eyes softened into something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. He didn't rush me, didn't touch me immediately. He knelt beside me, assessing me, his presence a shield against the world I had just escaped. You're safe now, he said gently. I won't let him touch you again. Not ever. In that moment, curled in the doorway of Jaxson Stone's house, I realized something astonishing. I wasn't alone anymore. I had made it through the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a fragile glimmer of hope. Even broken, even battered, I had survived. And now, I could finally start living again. I woke to warmth. It wasn't the warmth of blankets, though I was wrapped in them. It wasn't the warmth of a fire, though a small lamp glowed softly nearby. No, it was him, Jaxson Stone. His presence radiated a quiet intensity that made my pulse jump. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: safety. Aria? His voice was sharp now, anxious, laced with fear. Aria, can you hear me? Don't move yet. I tried to sit up, tried to speak, but my body refused. The bruises and fatigue from the crawl, the week of hiding, the violence, it all pressed down like lead. My limbs were weak, my voice a fragile whisper. I'm okay, I said, though even I didn't fully believe it. His eyes narrowed, and his jaw tightened. There was fire there, barely contained. You're not okay. Not after what he did. Don't try to convince me otherwise. I looked away.
I didn't want him to see me like this. Weak.
Vulnerable.
Broken.
But he did see. That was the thing about Jaxson, he always saw, even when you didn't want to be seen. He knelt beside me, his movements deliberate, careful. He didn't touch me immediately. He didn't try to lift me, to move me, to do anything I wasn't ready for. Instead, he assessed, watching, his expression a mixture of horror and barely controlled anger. What did he do to you? His voice was low now, almost a growl, but still gentle. I left, I whispered again. My throat burned, my lips trembled. I had to leave. His hand hovered near my shoulder, trembling slightly, unsure. Then, slowly, with infinite care, he touched me, not roughly, not with the force I had come to associate with danger, but lightly, as if holding something precious. You're safe now, he said. And that was all, but it was enough. It was a promise, a shield, a line drawn in the sand. No one would hurt me again. I studied him, trying to memorize every detail, the broad shoulders, the taut muscles, the careful precision in every movement. But it wasn't his size that struck me, it was his restraint. The way his heavy hands, capable of force, were used only to protect me, only to hold me gently, to support me, to keep me anchored. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, but not suffocating. It was a silence that held space for healing, for trust, for the first fragile flickers of connection since the darkness had consumed me. You don't have to talk, he said softly. You don't have to explain. I'll just stay right here until you're ready. And in that moment, curled against his side, feeling the steady strength of him without fear, I realized something profound. These hands, the hands I had once feared in every man, could be gentle, could be steady, could be the hands that saved me rather than destroyed me. For the first time, I let myself relax just a little, just enough to believe that maybe the world could be safe again. And maybe, just maybe, I could trust him with my heart. Healing wasn't a straight path. It was jagged, uneven, and exhausting. Some mornings I woke feeling strong, like I could conquer the world. Other mornings, I trembled at the slightest sound, every shadow threatening to pull me back into the fear I had thought I left behind. But Jaxson never rushed me. He never demanded that I be brave before I was ready. He stayed, constantly, a quiet presence, like a lighthouse casting light over the stormy seas of my mind. He didn't pressure me to talk. He didn't scold me for my tears. He simply waited. And in waiting, he gave me something I hadn't realized I was starving for: permission to exist fully, with all the jagged edges of my fear and my pain. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the curtains and dust danced in the beams, I tried to play the violin again. My hands shook violently as I held it. The thought of music, the thing that had once been my refuge, felt like a trap. What if he came back? What if I failed again? What if the world ended the only way I had ever known, in fear and pain? Jaxson knelt beside me, silent, his presence solid and grounding. You don't have to play today, he said quietly. His fingers brushed my shoulder gently, not pushing, not pulling, just there. I want to, I whispered, though my voice barely carried. He nodded, understanding. No pressure. No judgment. Just quiet support. When I drew the bow across the strings, the sound wobbled, unsteady, broken, but it was mine. Jaxson didn't flinch. He didn't look alarmed. He simply watched, a gentle anchor, letting me find the courage to make the sound I had once feared. You're doing fine, he said softly. Just breathe. Let it be your music, not his memory. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I hadn't needed to survive alone. I hadn't needed to endure the darkness entirely on my own. Jaxson had been there, always there, even when I hadn't reached for him. His support wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, consistent, unwavering. Later, as I rested against him on the sofa, I felt his arms wrap around me, not to restrain, not to dominate, but to protect. "You don't owe me anything," he said gently. "Just live.
Just be."
And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to relax completely. No pretending, no hiding, no fear. I realized then that love didn't have to hurt. Love didn't have to dominate or control. Love could be quiet. Love could be steady. Love could be the gentle force that helped me stand again after the world had knocked me down. And Jaxson, my brother's best friend, my silent guardian, the man whose strength I had always respected from afar, was exactly that kind of love. I let my head fall against his chest, letting the warmth and strength seep into me. His presence didn't erase the past. It didn't erase Victor, or the fear, or the pain. But it made it bearable. It made survival not just possible, but meaningful. And slowly, I understood. I wasn't just standing up for myself anymore. I was learning to live again with him standing beside me. Healing wasn't just about my body, it was about my soul. After weeks of trembling, hiding, and crawling through the darkness of fear, I realized that surviving wasn't enough. I had to learn to breathe again, to feel, to trust, to live beyond the shadows Victor had cast over me. Jaxson never rushed me. He didn't tell me to get over it or move on. He simply existed as a steady presence in my life, a reminder that strength didn't have to be cruel, that hands that could harm could also protect, that someone could stay by your side without judgment, without expectation. Some days were harder than others. Shadows lurked in corners. The wind sounded like a voice I had once dreaded, and every sudden noise made me flinch. One morning, I froze in the kitchen when a book fell from the shelf, my hands shaking violently. But Jaxson was there in an instant. "Aria," he said softly, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. "Breathe. In and out. You're safe. Right here, right now." I followed him, counting the breaths, letting the warmth of his hands ground me. Slowly, the panic ebbed, replaced by something I hadn't felt in months: control. My body responded to me again, and I realized that learning to breathe wasn't just physical. It was reclaiming myself from the darkness, inch by inch. Music, once a source of fear, became my ally again. Jaxson encouraged it in quiet, unobtrusive ways. One afternoon, he suggested we sit together while I played. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "Just play for yourself." I drew the bow across the strings, and though the sound wobbled and cracked at first, it was mine. I felt the tension in my shoulders ease, the tightness in my chest loosen. With every note, I reclaimed a fragment of my identity, the part that had been smothered by fear. Jaxson simply watched, silent but present, his eyes never leaving mine. Later, I realized that his protection wasn't about controlling me. It was about giving me space to find my own strength. When I faltered, he steadied me. When I needed support, he was there. When I wanted independence, he didn't hold me back. His strength was not violent. It was steady, patient, unwavering. We spent afternoons simply existing together. Sometimes talking. Sometimes silence. Sometimes laughter. And slowly, the world stopped feeling so hostile. Slowly, I stopped flinching at shadows. Slowly, I remembered how to trust. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the horizon, I realized something profound. I had survived the darkness. I had survived Victor. I had survived fear itself. But more importantly, I had begun to live. And in living, I discovered something else: the capacity to feel again.
Joy.
Laughter.
Hope. Love.
Not the twisted, suffocating kind I had known before. Something real, something steady, something unafraid. I leaned against Jaxson, letting the warmth of his body and the quiet of the evening sink into me. My chest rose and fell, my heart beating steadily. I was learning to breathe again, not just with my lungs, but with my entire self. And for the first time since that night when everything broke, I allowed myself to believe that life could be beautiful again. Evening fell like a soft blanket, the sky painted in shades of rose and gold. I sat on the porch, the cool wood beneath my hands grounding me, while Jaxson leaned back beside me, quiet, solid, like he always was. I realized, with a strange clarity, that the world no longer seemed so dangerous, not when he was near. "I don't know how to love," I admitted softly, my voice barely carrying over the rustle of the wind. My gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, the fading sunlight catching on the edges of the clouds. "I've been afraid for so long. I don't even know if I remember how." Jackson's hand brushed against mine, tentative at first, then settling comfortably over it. "Then we'll learn together," he said quietly. His eyes were warm, steady, and for a moment I felt my chest unclench from months of tension. It wasn't the impulsive, fiery love of stories or of passion. It was different. It was patient, gentle, and unwavering. I realized I didn't need fireworks or declarations. I needed safety. I needed trust. I needed someone who could hold me and let me breathe without ever forcing me to bend. I was so scared, I admitted, finally turning to look at him. I thought no one could ever be safe again. "You were right to be scared," he said softly, squeezing my hand. "But not with me. Not anymore. I'll keep you safe. I won't ever let anyone hurt you again." His words weren't dramatic. They didn't carry threats or grandeur. But they carried power, the kind that comes from someone who will fight for you without hesitation, without showiness, without needing you to be grateful. Just someone who stands beside you, always. I let myself lean against him, finally allowing the tension in my shoulders to melt. I didn't need to pretend anymore. I didn't need to hide my scars, my fears, or my weakness. With him, I could be whole, even with all my broken pieces. The evening deepened, stars beginning to prick the sky. I felt a gentle warmth spread through me, not from the fading sunlight, but from the presence beside me. Jackson's hands, once capable of immense strength, had only ever been heavy when holding me in safety, never in violence. I thought back to those weeks of fear, of trembling, and realized how much stronger I had become, not because of the pain, but because of him. "I love you," I whispered, the words tasting strange but right. He didn't move too fast. He didn't try to claim me in words or actions. He simply smiled, a small, quiet curve of lips, and said, "I've always loved you, Aria. Always." And in that moment, I understood something I had never understood before. Love didn't have to hurt. Love didn't have to control. Love could be steady, protective, gentle, and patient. Love could be this calm certainty that no matter what had happened, someone would always be there to stand beside you. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the rise and fall of his chest, the warmth of his arms around me. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly safe. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time, I believed that this life, our life, could be beautiful, fierce, and unbreakable.